Hey, welcome to the Healthy Postnatal Buddy podcast with your postnatal expert, Peter Lamp. That, as always, would be me. This is a podcast for the 9th of Feb 2025. And today I have a wonderful interview with pediatric eating specialist Jessica Setnick. We're talking overcoming and preventing eating disorders in children and all that sort of stuff. You are going to love this one. This video of this podcast is audio only, but I love it when an expert comes on that knows so much that whenever I ask my dumb questions, you can almost hear the eye rolling. Really, trust me, you're gonna love this. We're going to talk about what some of the causes of pediatric eating disorders, some of the solutions, what you can do, and all that type of stuff. It's a great half hour. So without further ado, here we go. So eating disorders in children, just how common is it?
Okay, so this should be an easy question to answer, right? But it's not. So let me start by saying that if we want the short answer is that 1 out of every 40 children, that's between 0 and 18 right now, will experience an eating disorder sometime in their life.
That's
1 in 40. So that's more common than diabetes. That's more common than almost anything you can probably think of. It's a lot. Doesn't say that they're all going to have that eating disorder in childhood, but 1 out of 40 kids from 0 to 18 right now will have an eating disorder during their life. That's the statistic. Okay. The long answer is eating disorders is a very specific term, right? A medical diagnosis that has specific criteria. And after working in the eating disorder field for only a short time now it's been 26 years, but even a very short time of working in the field, I realized that those specific definitions are not helping anybody, because they only count people who have gotten to a severe state. And we are trying to catch eating problems in children a long time before they get to that diagnosable state. And so when you say how common are eating disorders in children, the statistics we have are 100% based on who gets diagnosed and who gets treatment. And I believe that there are a lot of problems that children have, that could either lead to eating disorders but aren't that severe yet, or are just always going to stay at a sort of sub-severe level and are still impairing someone's functioning. So I think eating disorders in children is sort of almost a trick question to me, even though I gave you the answer. Yeah. The truth is, eating issues in children, if we expand the terminology, are extremely common because, for the most part, children are living in society, and our society is just drenched in dysfunctional eating behaviors.
Well, you're definitely not wrong about the last bit. It's interesting because, indeed, because I come across this, because 1 in 40 still sounds like a lot, like you said. It's really common, but I think for most people it doesn't sound like that much, because 1 in 40, it's one of my surgeon clients.
It's basically 1 in every big kindergarten class today, right now.
Because one of my surgeon clients would always say to people that people don't understand risk. Right, 2.5% doesn't sound like a tremendous amount. Whereas if she said, so she used to do like colorectal surgery and that type of stuff, and she always used to point out that if she said to someone, there's a 5% chance that, or a 1 in 20 chance that something could go wrong, they'd say, that'll be fine, that'll be grand, that's not that bad. And then she said, if I put 20 people in a room and I tell them one of you is likely going to have complications from this, then they're all like, well, wait a minute, maybe not so much.
Right.
And it's interesting that you then say, okay, then if you then expand it to be outside that very narrow definition of eating disorders, that is then significantly more common. Because I think most parents that I know will at least know someone or know of someone who is more than just air quote a picky eater.
Yes.
Right. And it's the and that is really what we're talking about. So for instance, I know the story of a relatively young lady who is quite a bit underweight and is a problematic eater, but is not anorexic. If you know, as in within the narrow terms, that she doesn't not eat. But how do you help prevent it escalating to the next level and even hopefully help them recover from
okay, so that's two very big questions. So
yes,
helping someone recover is a really hard, long process, and there's not even any consensus in the field on whether you can be, for lack of a better word, cured. So I prefer terms like remission, where someone hasn't had any symptoms in 5 years. I sort of borrow that from the oncology field. So but to me, someone could be in remission from their eating disorder, but it's sort of a lifelong chronic condition for many people, sort of like eczema or something like that, where you say, you have it, but you have a flare up. You may not have any symptoms, can be controlled with medicine, that kind of thing. So I would say an eating disorder can be managed, even if not cured. There are some people who say that a full recovery is possible, but there's no agreement on what that would look like. So does that mean you never have any thoughts or temptations to restrict your food or to use a compensatory behavior? I believe that true recovery means any of those urges stay in the thought level and don't necessarily be acted upon, because you can't, I believe, control your automatic thoughts. And so, for example, I would consider myself in a good recovery, having not had any symptoms of my eating disorder in quite a lot of years, but I might look in the mirror and say, I wonder if I've gained weight. Should I lose weight? Even though maybe medically no one would suggest that I lose weight. So to me, having that thought and then saying, oh, look, there's that thought again, and moving on is recovery, as opposed to not eating or eating and then throwing up or something like that. So that to me is recovery. So to get to that place takes a lot of analyzing your thoughts and rethinking them. So you have your thought, but you have to come up with different ways of handling them. And a lot of recovery also, in my opinion, includes medication, because a lot of people don't recognize that the roots of an eating disorder are biological. They may be genetic, not necessarily inherited genetic, but it could be genetic mutations. It could be things that are environmental, like COVID can cause an eating disorder, different things like that. A concussion can cause an eating disorder. So there's a lot of biological. And then when you're in the soup or the pool of diet culture, those seeds can get watered and then develop into an eating disorder. So that's the answer to how to recover. We need to treat the underlying medical condition, if it's depression, if it's anxiety, if it's obsessive compulsive disorder. And then there's a long-term work on the thoughts, and then there's a long-term work on the eating behaviors. The other question you asked is, how do we prevent? I'm not sure we can prevent all eating disorders, but this is something I speak about quite often. And just 2 nights ago, I gave a talk to school nurses about what we could be doing to prevent eating disorders in kids. And the number one thing is we need to change the way that we talk about food and eating and bodies with kids, because we need to be actively trying to counteract diet culture instead of accidentally or passively allowing it to go unchecked. And I can elaborate on what that means to me if you would like.
Oh yeah, no, that'd be awesome, because one of the things I was going to ask is how important to, let's say, prevent escalation of an eating disorder, or even prevent eating disorders to some extent, is building a healthy relationship with food, and that going both ways.
Right.
So,
And I love that you use that term, a healthy relationship with food. That is something that I would say 25 years ago, I was going and giving talks and using the words healthy relationship with food, and people were raising their hand and saying, what does that mean? Or even
mhm,
saying you can't have a relationship with food because it's an inanimate like they were arguing with me. And now it's, I think, worked its way into our cultural consciousness, right?
yeah.
And so I love that you use that terminology, even not being an eating
Mhm,
expert at all. So that's great. The healthy relationship with food is the key. It's so much more important than any one food a child does or doesn't eat, but it's so easy to get sort of goal oriented. Like, if my child will just eat one green vegetable a day, they'll be okay.
yeah,
It's sort of
exactly.
our
Yes. Yeah.
anxiety
Yeah.
over it, right? And so we project that onto our kids, and that's what we're trying to do. So the number one thing we can do to prevent eating issues in our kids is work on our own eating issues. And that I
Mhm,
actually teach a workshop called Healing Your Inner Eater, which is all about what's going on with us and how did we get the things that we believe about food, who taught those to us, and do we want to keep those? Was that correct information, or did that come from someone else's sort of dysfunctional eating behaviors? And so taking care of ourselves and rethinking everything we think we know about eating
mhm,
is really step one. And then step two is being really age appropriate with kids. So it's really tempting to say, okay, I'm thinking of someone who is a friend of mine whose child is now out of college and working as a teacher. So it's rewind back to when this child was maybe 8 years old.
mhm,
And she said, I'm starting to get worried about my child's size. So again, our anxiety as
mhm.
adults. And she said, when we leave church, they always have donuts, and she always wants a donut. And so I say, no, we're not having donuts, but when we get home, you can have an apple. Do you think that's the right thing to do? And I said, first of all, I want you to know that as a parent, you can always make the decision about what is provided to your child by someone outside of the home,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
if you don't want your child to eat a donut, that's totally legit. But I would encourage you not to say you can't have a donut, you can have an apple,
Mhm.
and instead to say, no, we're not having donuts right now. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, you're painting the donut as something they can't have, which we all want more of what we can't have. You're painting the donut as a negative compared to the apple as a positive, right? There's all this. And she said, I'm so glad you said that, because the reason I called you is because for the very first time, my child lied to me. And when I picked her up from my mom's house and asked her if she'd had anything to eat, she said no. And later, my mom told me that, in fact, she had had something to eat, which was
Mhm.
fine. It was the lying that was the issue.
Sure.
And so I didn't know that part at first, right?
Mhm.
But that's the kind of behavior that we start to develop in kids, is sneak eating and lying and
Yeah.
those kind of things, hiding food. If we start to portray food as something that has moral value, or other kids can have it but you can't have it, that kind of thing. And so age appropriate talking about food is something really important. It's so tempting to say to a child that has too much sugar in it or something like that, and
Mm.
that's really not, again, it's not age appropriate. Children don't have discernment. They're so specific. So if you say that, I'll just use sugary cereal because people love to pick on that. That sugary cereal is bad for you. If they go to a friend's house and they're offered sugary cereal, they feel like, I shouldn't eat that because it's bad for me. Or if they see a friend eating it, don't eat that, it's bad for you. They don't understand moderation. These kind of
Mhm.
concepts that we try to use on kids, they don't understand that. We barely understand those things, right? So it's very, we need to be talking about things like fueling and energy, and is your tummy hungry, and things that are really age appropriate for kids, and not putting these intangible ideas in their minds, especially moral values on food.
Yeah, and then that's a really interesting one, because I think everybody might, from my generation, and I'm 50, as I always point out to any listeners, I'm 50 years old. I was raised with the, you will finish what's on your plate.
Oh
right?
my gosh, Peter, I'm 52. I'm right there with you. For me, it was children starving in China. And of course, you think, how is me finishing the food going to
Yeah,
solve things for children in China? Right. And by the way, there were kids that were hungry across the street. We didn't have to go to China to find
yeah.
them. But I'm so with you. Please go on.
So it's because I still hear that from parents, and I always cringe a little bit when they say, when the child has clearly had enough. They've eaten and they're done. It's not like they're leaving two Brussels sprouts and they've eaten all the dessert.
Right.
They've kind of just, I'm done. I'm done eating.
Right.
And it took me such a long time. And I don't have any sort of problematic eating behaviors, but I do have I can easily have a problematic relationship with food in that I can take like kind of like what you said, I can take the way I was raised out on somebody else
Yes.
quite comfortable by saying no, but this is what you need to do because I can
Yeah.
always hear my dad's voice, if you know
Yes.
what I mean, or and to break away from that. It now makes me cringe when I hear other people say
Yeah.
things like, yeah, starving kids were in Ethiopia for us,
Uh-huh.
and that. But when a child says they've had enough or they
Hmm.
don't feel like it, to just
Hmm.
leave that
Right.
sounds like a positive step for me if they've
Yeah,
genuinely just had
letting
enough.
them trust their inner wisdom. Yes. So I have two things to share with you for anyone who's thinking that same thing. How are we going to heal our inner eater, right? How are we
Hmm.
going to understand this differently? One is sort of scientific. If you right now put your hands into fists and then put those two fists together. So
Hmm.
no one can see what I'm doing, but I just put my two hands into fists, put my
Yeah.
fists together. This is the size of your stomach approximately. So
Hmm.
think of a little kid, think of their two little teeny hands that they put in their mittens.
Yeah.
They make them into fists, put them in. Now your stomach can stretch somewhat. That's a fact. But that is the size of a child's stomach. The amount of food that will fill that stomach is pretty small.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Whatever we visualize and put on a plate and imagine that a child should eat has nothing to do with what is actually their capacity for eating. The
Mhm.
other thing is, children are all of us, except there's some exceptions of medically ill children. I will grant you that. But most healthy kids have an internal cue of how much they need to eat and when. That's just,
Yeah.
I mean, you know that if you've ever, nursed a baby or bottle fed a baby, you know that they, at some point, they just go, "Puh," and they
Yeah.
sort of
Enough's
spit out the
enough. Yeah.
nipple. They're done,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a very fascinating study that was done by some dietitians at least 20 years ago, and they gave 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds were their study participants. On different days, they gave them different size plates of food.
Mhm.
So it was always macaroni and cheese, small plate, small portion, big plate, big portion, medium sized plate, medium sized portion.
Yeah.
And what they found was that the 3-year-olds, no matter what size plate or portion you gave them, the 3-year-olds would eat what they wanted and then move on, go play.
Right.
The 5-year-olds would eat a different amount depending on how much you offered them. And so, what we take away from that is somewhere between 3 and 5, we are conditioning kids to stop listening to what is on their internal cues,
Mhm.
and we are conditioning them to eat what we imagine they should eat or what we want them to eat. And when we detach children from their internal cues, they are then, excuse me, they are then easily tempted, that's not the right word, easily impressionable
Mhm.
to supersized portions, or the perfect example here, and I don't know what your portions are like where you live, but a pound of pasta here costs about $1, which I
Mhm.
think is pretty
Yeah, that's
equivalent,
about
right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah. If a restaurant's going to sell it to you for $12 or $24, why wouldn't they put a pound of pasta on a plate? And by the way, $1 is the retail cost. They bought it at wholesale,
Yeah.
right? So you felt like you got a great value, but there's way too much food on your plate for your stomach. But if we've conditioned kids to eat whatever is on their plate, then they're at the mercy of whoever put the food on their plate.
Sure. No, that's a really good point because I always used to give this example with regards to restaurant portion sizes. I always used to, if I go to a higher end restaurant, and I don't do that often, but if I go to a high end restaurant with a tasting menu, 5-course tasting menu, every dish tends to be small, and every plate has to be done with have a small amount of food on it. But by the time I leave the restaurant, a couple of hours later, I'm completely content. As in, I'm happy as a clam. I've had nice food, I've had enough food, and my body goes, yeah, that's about right, because these people have thought about it. If I go to a cheaper place and I pay significantly less for food, but I get a mountain of food, I always leave going, either I've left a lot of food on my plate, or I leave going, yeah, I ate too much and I feel terrible. Right? And it is exactly like what you said. If and this will be a hang up of of my childhood and all that. If you put a large amount of food in front of me, I almost still feel obliged to eat it, because it would be rude not to those poor kids.
Well, it would be rude. And then there's the starving children in Ethiopia. And then we haven't even mentioned the whole, I paid for that food, so you're going to eat it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I paid for that. Yeah, exactly. And now that translates to, oh, but I paid for it. Right. Or, and therefore it would be a waste. Whereas I now understand, much more of the, I've had enough, and therefore, by definition, it's not wasteful. I might have cooked a bit too much. I can have some tomorrow, and all that.
And I will grant you that food waste is something that touches the heart of every dietitian. We don't want food waste. We don't want food in the trash can. We want to come up with other solutions. Order less. Don't be as hungry when you get to the restaurant, so your eyes aren't bigger than your stomach. Ask for a to-go container and take it with you.
Yeah.
Even if you're going to give it to a homeless person, and we want all of those things. But at the end of the day, if the only two choices are eat it or throw it away, if those are literally your only choices, to me, it's either trash in your body or trash in a trash can. I mean, granted, your body knows what to do with excess food that you eat once in a while. It just gets stored and used later, no problem. But from the emotional point of view, the guilt of feeling like you have to eat food that you are not hungry for and you don't want, that is something that as a culture, we need to really stop indoctrinating more people into that cult.
Yeah, because again, that comes back to that healthy relationship with food and all that, and all that type of thing. It's the, if we're in our kids, I suppose, if we're creating that you either eat everything on your plate or don't eat anything at all, right? Because it's always extremes. Then the only the psychological impact of what we're creating, I suppose, will last them much longer than we actually think it will. Because
yes, and you haven't even talked yet about the whole, but your mommy slaved over that food for you, so you need to eat it if you love her, right? There's so much. The psychological impact of what we do is intense, and I'm glad that you don't have the genes for an eating disorder, because you didn't develop one. Great. But we don't know who does and who doesn't. We do know that if you have a relative with an eating disorder, you probably have a gene in there somewhere, because you have a much higher chance. We also know that relatives of people with alcoholism have a higher chance of eating disorders. So we don't know what that is, what that connection is, but it's not necessarily learned behavior. It's something internal. So the psychological issues are the biggest part. I think it's not just, I got bad advice about food, right?
Of course.
It's not, it's more the impact of, am I disappointing someone by not eating this, right? It's that aspect of it. Yeah.
So when we get to people who have slight problems of eating, so not full-on eating disorders, but kids especially, does the why matter?
Oh my goodness, you're speaking my language, Peter. Wow. Yes, the motive is so important. So if you have, let's say you have two teenagers sitting at lunch in school, and they're both having only a salad for lunch. One of them says, oh yeah, I'm only eating a salad for lunch because after school, my uncle is in town from America and we're going out to an early dinner. And so I just am having a salad because I'm going to be eating dinner at 4:30 today. And the other child says, oh no, I'm only eating salad because I'm scared to eat anything besides salad. It might make me fat. So it's not the salad, right? It's the why. 1000%. It's the why. Yes.
And does it then matter when it comes to dealing with kids who do have actually problematic behaviors with around food. So not eating enough, or eating too much, or binge eating, or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
again, like you said, mainly the lying about food, that
Yeah.
type of stuff. I would almost class that as like early addictive behavior, as in the behaviors
You could.
of
You
I mean,
could.
and as in the behavior of an addict. I don't mean to put a judgment on that. I'm just mean that that's a little bit, that can be a bit tricky. But does it then, for recovery, does it matter why they do, why they're not eating as much, or why they're eating too much? Mm-hmm.
So when we get stressed, eating, not eating, exercising, throwing up, all of those things change our brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I think that there are connections and similarities and reasons that people use food, but there's also differences.
Of course. Of course. The point I was indeed hoping to get to was that from my understanding, a lot of, and I have some experience in this, a lot of addictive behavior is about control or loss of control. And is food, and I'm not saying food is addictive. I'm not saying sugar is addictive in the way that some people claim it, like at all, right? Sugar isn't the new cocaine or any of that type of nonsense. I'm just asking that are eating disorders and light eating, so not full eating, so problematic behavior around eating.
Yeah.
Is that usually about control, or is it a similar sort of thing that, and therefore does the treatment or the help that you give, does that come from a similar background?
So I don't think there's anything universal, but yes, for some people, certainly. For some people, it's not necessarily control. That's maybe not quite the right word, but it's seeking something. It's seeking to feel better, right? People don't throw up their food to get high, but someone must be feeling bad if that makes them feel better. And so we're looking for the reason that someone is feeling so bad that is the severity level of what they have to do to their brain chemistry to feel better. And so that can be something different for different people. So that could be disappointment and loss. It could be grief type of loss. It could be rejection. It can be feeling inadequate. It could be, it's not usually going to be feeling happy, but for some people that could be a very uncomfortable situation. So feelings are chemicals too. And so I would say it's more oriented toward feelings in general than control itself. I think control could be a feeling, or loss of control, or feeling trapped. Those are all feelings that could generate dysfunctional eating behaviors, but I wouldn't want to generalize or globalize and say control is the feeling that everyone is experiencing who has an eating disorder.
Yeah, sure. That's a really good point. Because it's one of those things that a lot of the things that we see around, and it's kind of like what you said, a lot of the behaviors that I suppose people see in their children is just a reflection of themselves, isn't it? And therefore, and I'm not saying that the child has an eating behavioral issue and therefore you have one, but or that the parents are to blame. But a lot of the ideas around food, the relationship around food, comes from nature, from nurture rather than nature. Even though, like you said, there is a genetic element to it. So
yeah. So I agree with you, but I think parents and the way we view food is just one drop in the bucket compared to the whole society. So we all grew up in, or are swimming in the same swimming pool of diet culture that our kids are in too. So yes, I'm glad you said not to blame parents, because that's not what causes eating disorders. It's sort of sometimes the way we view food as a solution or food as a problem that causes eating disorders. And that can come from lots of different places too. That can come from schools. That can come from, the number of children, patients that eating disorder dietitians have seen whose eating disorder started from a scary food related movie that they watched in health class is innumerable, right?
Yeah, the whole Super Size Me type
Right.
echo documentaries, right?
Yes. So that to me is really, I think what we do in the home is a reflection of that. And
Sure.
and what most loving parents are trying to do is protect their kids.
Mhm.
And that's the thing that ends up being a challenge, is that we're trying to protect our kids when really we're adding to the problem. So to
Mhm.
protect our kids would be protecting their internal cues, protecting them from outside factors that tell them you need to eat more, you need to eat less. And we don't want to be one of those factors.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point. So how do you try as a parent stop being one of those factors?
Right. So here's the thing. First of all, we have to stop teaching kids about food and instead start listening better, because
Mm,
not talking about calories, carbs, macros, weight, things like that, we think of that as the absence of teaching. So you're telling me not to teach anything to my kids about food? No. Stop talking about the adult topics related to
yeah.
food and start using words like fuel and empty feelings. Oh, is your tummy hungry? Yeah. Hungry feels like being empty. There's other feelings that feel like being empty too. Bored can feel like being empty.
Hmm.
Lonely can feel like being empty, right? And what do you think you're feeling right now? And instead of every food choice being a chance to mess up, think instead of teaching kids the skills that they need. And this is the nutty thing, is that skills like creative expression and being able to talk about feelings and teaching non-food ways to meet emotional needs, stress management, coping skills, forgiveness for making mistakes. Like, the average person hearing me say that, even the above average person, is going to say, those are not nutrition related things, Jessica.
Hmm.
But when we teach those things, what we're doing is we're eliminating the need for a child to use food to do those things. We're eliminating the need for a child to use food to express their emotions. We're eliminating the need for a child to use food to connect with people. We're teaching them the skills to connect with people regardless of food or eating. And the other key crucial thing we can do is to stop demeaning other people's bodies, including our
Hmm.
own bodies, or what other people are eating. In other words, we don't know what that other person's choices are based on. And so we need to stop judging other people's choices, including our kids. It's so hard. But if we could encourage and demonstrate body respect and embracing the variety of sizes and the shapes and diversity of human beings, then we, again, it's not about nutrition, right? You're saying, but you're not teaching kids about nutrition.
Hmm.
But what we're doing is we're eliminating the need for kids to manipulate their nutrition in order to manipulate the size of their body.
Yeah, and exactly what you said. An 8-year-old doesn't need to know about proteins, fats, and carb splits and all that type of stuff, right? That is just, it's great. If you're in the fitness world and you're 20, 21 years old, and you will say, I want some more protein in my life, then that's a different beast altogether. But yeah, that's a very, very powerful point. I know you're very short for time. So I just wanted to ask if there's anything you wanted to add, because I think we've covered quite a bit, even with the little interruption.
We have covered a lot. And the reason that my time is limited is because I have 3.5-year-old triplets in my family. They're not my children, they're my niece and nephews. And we have a snow day here, and they just came over. And
Nice.
it is incredible to be part of their eating life
Hmm.
and their eating development, right? These are children that had to be tube fed. They were so tiny. They were 2 pounds each when they were born, which I can't
Wow.
recalculate for you, but very small,
2 pounds, about 1 kg. That is tiny, tiny.
very small. So there was the opportunity for a lot of eating problems to develop.
Yeah.
And the littlest one, the littlest girl, she didn't want to take a bottle. She was not interested in it. It was really stressful. And I'm glad I was part of their lives. I was able to counsel their parents, and now they're 3 kids and they eat all kinds of things. And if they don't want something, they don't eat it. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful to see. So I just wanted to share. That's my reason.
I think that's awesome. I think that's good. I think that's one of the that's a better reason than saying I've got another consultation. Right?
Right. So in answer to your question, is there anything else? I would say yes. I'll just mention my workbook, Healing Your Inner Eater,
Yeah.
might be something useful for someone who's listening to us and thinks, yeah, I do want to sort of assess the eating messages I have in my mind. Some of them I don't like. Some of them I'm not sure if they're right or not, but I want to do things differently for the next generation. The workbook is available at healingyourinnereater.com. I'd hate to sound like a commercial, but it's what we're saying kind of appeals to someone. They might be interested. And what I'll do is I'll put in a coupon code. So if someone enters the word podcast at checkout, it will bring the price of the workbook down to $15.
That's cool, because it's like $45 or something like that. So that's a big discount, and that's well worth the money. I will obviously link to absolutely everything in the podcast description for anybody listening to this. Don't worry if you missed it. I will link to it. The coupon code and all that will also be in there.
Great.
On that happy note, thanks so much. On that happy note, we'll press stop record here. And press stop record is exactly what I did. Thanks very much to Jessica for coming on. Like I said, I had a blast. We had some technical difficulties. That took a bit of time, and as you heard there towards the end, she's a very, very busy lady who has her priorities right, and and therefore it's a bit shorter than say an hour. And I could have kept this going for hours. I mean, she's up there with some of my favorite experts that I've had the pleasure of having had on the podcast. Like I said, I love it when I'm trying to think of a question that I think is going to be useful, and I can almost hear the eye roll. I can see the eye roll, but sometimes you can see the face of the person you're interviewing go, okay, how am I going to be nice about this? Because the question matters, but he is an idiot for phrasing it in such a way. And, like I said, I love that. That's when you're talking to somebody who's had to answer the same question a million times. Doesn't mean that the question isn't useful, but it just means that they are ridiculously experienced with regards to answering these questions. I do it myself when it comes to postpartum stuff. Anything about diastasis, I just go, here we go again, right? It's that thing. Anyways, Healing Your Inner Eater. The workbook is available. It's $45 of your finest American dollars. But with the code that I will put in the podcast description, you can get it for only $15, and I think it's well worth the money. We need to create more people who have healthy relationships with food, and the younger we can start doing that, the sooner you can start on the little boys and girls, the better it is, right? Anyways, back next week. You take care of yourself. Here's a new bit of music. Peter at healthypostnatalbody.com, by the way. Always remember, you take care of yourself, right? Bye now.
Like